Silvio Dante gets called the good one because he smiles at the right moments, keeps his voice down, and makes everyone feel like the room is under control. That's the trick. The Sopranos doesn't give Silvio charm as a personality trait, it gives it to him as a weapon. Because the loud psychos announce themselves. Silvio doesn't have to. Think about what the show does to the viewer. It trains the audience to relax around him. Polly is a hazard sign. Christopher is a live wire. Ralphie is a crime scene waiting to happen. But Sil? Sil feels like stability. The guy who keeps Tony honest. The guy whose opinion Tony actually respects. The guy who can crack a joke and somehow make violence feel like background noise. Now here's the question nobody wants to answer. What if that stability is exactly what makes him more dangerous than Tony? Because Tony at least performs guilt. Tony wraps brutality in philosophy, therapy talk, and a little ceremony, like the suffering needs a justified receipt. Silvio doesn't bother. He switches modes. One scene he's comic relief, the next he's a function. No speeches, no hesitation you can trust, just efficiency. And long-term parking is the proof. Not because someone dies, people die every week in this show. It's proof because of who's driving. If it's Polly or Patsy, alarms go off. But it's Silvio, so the viewer still believes in the hospital, still believes in mercy, still believes the good one wouldn't do that. And then the car turns. So the real question isn't why the scene is brutal. The real question is, how did the show get people to like the man who makes it happen? Silvio Dante is the character who proves, with irritating clarity, that charm is not the opposite of cruelty. It is often the wrapping that lets cruelty travel uninspected. Most of the time, he appears engineered to soothe. Comic relief with a permanent half-frown, a consigliere who dampens tantrums, the man who can toss off a movie impression and still seem like the only adult in a room full of volatility. Compared with the crew's chronic liabilities, Polly's ceaseless agitation, Christopher's hair-trigger self-destruction, the rotating cast of loud egos eager to mistake noise for authority, Silvio reads as level-headed, helpful, and broadly pleasant company. That is precisely why the moments when he turns vicious land like a punch. The contrast is the point, and the series makes sure it hurts. Two scenes do the most damage to the comfort he creates. The first is his assault on Tracy in a parking lot, a reminder that in this universe, discipline is just sadism with a job title. The second is the drive in long-term parking, when Adriana Lacerva is collected under the pretense of safety and delivered into a quiet, final disaster. In both, the violence is not framed as a chaotic lapse or an impulsive overreaction. It is measured, practiced, and disturbingly easy for him. He does not look like a man forced into ugliness. He looks like a man fluent in it, and perhaps even warmed by it. Long-term parking is as devastating as it is because the episode chooses Silvio as the instrument. If the driver were a more transparently menacing soldier, suspicion would arrive early, and the scene would become an exercise in waiting for the inevitable. Put Patsy, Polly, or any regularly combustible enforcer behind the wheel, and the audience's alarm system would start screaming the moment Adriana buckles her seatbelt. Silvio, however, has been positioned for years as reliable infrastructure. Tony's steady right hand, the voice of reason, the dependable problem solver who rarely draws the boss's wrath and never seems to need to posture for authority. That familiarity is weaponized. The episode keeps the possibility of mercy alive precisely because Silvio is the one offering the ride, and the audience wants to believe that the person who delivers calm will also deliver safety. When the car turns off the road and the truth emerges, the scene does not merely shock, it chills. The technique is not subtle. It is the oldest trick in tragedy, the one where the audience is allowed to believe in mercy for just long enough that the collapse feels bodily. The horror is intensified by the victim's familiarity. Adriana is not a faceless rival or an off-screen casualty, not an enemy introduced for the convenience of being removed. She is someone the series has made watchable, sympathetic, frequently trapped, and painfully human. Her death is not only brutal, it is personal, and the show refuses to cushion it. Silvio's demeanor during that killing is what makes it so hard to rationalize. Tony Soprano is fully capable of ordering the death of a crew member's girlfriend if she is labeled a threat, and nobody should pretend otherwise. Yet there is a plausible world in which Tony would wrap the act in ceremony, a veneer of regret, a performance of grim necessity, the ritual language of business that lets everyone pretend there is still a code. Silvio offers almost none of that pageantry. His impatience when Adriana tries to escape, the way he speaks to her like a nuisance rather than a person, the flat efficiency of his cruelty, these choices strip away the protective theater that keeps viewers comfortably entertained. The murder plays less like a tragic climax and more like the world's worst errand, completed by a man who knows the route by heart. It is a cold, bureaucratic kind of violence, and that is exactly why it feels sociopathic. This is not a continuity mistake. It is the thesis. David Chase builds a world that seduces first and indicts later. The series invites affection for criminals who banter, eat at family tables, take advice, worry about children, and convince themselves that their work is simply a rough trade. Much of the ugliest consequence is kept at a distance. Victims off screen, victims with no names, victims introduced as irritants rather than people. Violence framed as mob-on-mob housekeeping. The show's camera often allows the audience to enjoy the charisma without paying the bill. Then, at carefully chosen moments, it presents the invoice in full, forcing recognition of what those likable guys are capable of when the charm is no longer useful. That is why Adriana's death is one of the series' most effective moral reversals. It rips the wool off the audience's eyes, not with abstract criminality, but with a direct, intimate atrocity committed against someone viewers have been trained to care about. It is not safe, not flattering, and certainly not comforting, which is why it remains unforgettable. Silvio is the perfect vehicle for that moral ambush, because his everyday role is designed to earn trust. As consigliere, he keeps Tony honest in the only sense that matters inside this ecosystem. Honest about strategy, optics, and survivability. He is the rock of the crew, the one who can be counted on, the one whose caution occasionally makes Tony sit up and listen. In Tony's orbit, that kind of credibility is scarce. Others may sometimes get through. An elder associate like Hesh might carry weight, for example. But Silvio's influence is unusually steady. He is loyal, he speaks plainly when necessary, and he rarely puts himself in a position where Tony's anger can land on him. Whether that is wisdom, manipulation, or both is part of the unease. The series reinforces his aura of steadiness by rationing access to his interior life. Unlike Polly or Christopher, he rarely receives a long subplot that exposes insecurities and private humiliations. In part, this is structural. A consigliere is built to support the boss's narrative, not compete with it. In part, it aligns with performance economy. Steve Van Zant's style is still, timing-focused, and persona-driven, and the show tailors the character to those strengths. That is not a knock, it is design. The result is that Silvio arrives as an icon more than as a confessional, which makes the violent ruptures feel even more startling. When someone with an overdeveloped inner life commits violence, the audience is invited to interpret it. When Silvio does, the audience is left with the simpler, colder conclusion. This is simply what he is. That control, however, is not morality. It is management. Silvio's professional base is the Bada Bing, a strip club treated in many scenes as colorful background. Neon, music, jokes, and the comforting illusion that the dancers are simply part of the decor. Look past the banter, and the implication is bleak. Control over women's bodies and labor is not incidental. It is core to the enterprise. He cheats on his wife while presiding over a workplace where coercion and intimidation are normalized, and where employment blurs into something far darker. Described plainly, the operation resembles a pipeline of exploitation that edges into trafficking dynamics. Women kept vulnerable, controlled, and profitable. The Tracy scene is not an anomaly. It is the show lifting the curtain on what the club's warm lighting has been hiding. The man who makes jokes in the back room also enforces violence against the women whose labor sustains his income. Convenient, isn't it? How likability thrives on selective attention. So why does he remain likable? The question is less about Silvio and more about the cues audiences are trained to mistake for virtue. He is respected by nearly everyone around him, second only to Tony in the New Jersey hierarchy. And that respect gets misread as decency because it arrives packaged as composure. He does not complain constantly. He does not explode daily. He appears dependable and professional. The strong, silent type the series invokes through its running nostalgia for Gary Cooper and the fantasy of masculine restraint. Silvio embodies that fantasy. Quiet, contained, seemingly above petty drama. He even draws a line at therapy in his own way, understanding enough not to mock the boss openly, yet certain it will never happen for him. The message is clear. Feelings are for other people. The pose depends on compartmentalization, and Silvio might be the series' cleanest demonstration of how effectively it can function. He can be jovial in one scene, a procedural monster in the next, and then return to jokes as if the earlier violence were a meeting he attended. The mechanism is not mysterious. It is the practiced reduction of people into categories. A woman becomes an inconvenience. A friend becomes a liability. A human life becomes a target. To do what he does, he must disregard who Adriana is and see only what she represents to the organization. This is why the killing feels so alien and yet so coherent. It is not out of character. It is the character, briefly shown without the mask. The show offers smaller hints that this is his operating system. He shows hesitation in moments where friendship complicates the task, such as the discomfort surrounding Big Pussy's execution, suggesting that the machinery needs extra fuel when the victim is one of them. But that hesitation is not redemption. It is technique. It reveals that conscience exists only as a variable to be managed, not as a mandate to be obeyed. Tony's own compartmentalization after Adriana's death provides a grim parallel. He reaches for a crude insult about her, delivered with an unmistakable lack of sincerity, because vulgar dismissal is cheaper than grief. The line is not the truth of his feeling. It is a tool to extinguish it. Then he holds Christopher, and both men choke up, briefly exposing the emotional damage the lifestyle demands they keep buried. The show uses that sequence to illustrate a central pathology. The men continually manufacture contempt to survive their own actions. That contempt is not honesty, it is anesthesia. Silvio's absence of ceremony is simply a purer form of the same anesthetic. Even Silvio's humor is part of the seduction. He is funny in a way that feels effortless. A grimace, a perfectly timed imitation, a dry aside that punctures tension without demanding attention. His movie star impressions land not because of their accuracy, but because of their confidence, which is itself a form of authority in this world. The series also lets him be ridiculous, his temper flaring at a club employee over something trivial, barking orders with the petty fury of a man who believes the room exists to be arranged to his liking. The comedy works because it frames domination as personality. The audience laughs, the character becomes iconic, and the violence keeps its day job as a punchline's shadow. The character's physical branding completes the illusion of stability. The hair is immaculate to the point of theatricality, and the behind-the-scenes trivia that it is a wig only deepens the sense that Silvio is curated, an image maintained with discipline. His face does much of the acting, a single frown capable of signaling agreement, skepticism, amusement, threat, or dismissal without raising his voice. It reads as the nonverbal equivalent of a consigliere's favorite method: say less, control more. That control helps explain his peculiar position with Tony. He rarely incurs Tony's full wrath the way others eventually do, which signals not only closeness but competence. He knows how to stay useful, how to time dissent, how to advise without challenging the boss's ego. It is integrity in the same way a lock is integrity: reliable, not virtuous. Some interpretations cast Silvio as a covert psychopath, and the series supplies enough evidence for the label to feel plausible without reducing him to a medical pamphlet. His response to other men's brutality can feel abstract, less moral disgust than pragmatic irritation, as if violence is merely poor workplace hygiene. When Ralphie's cruelty erupts, Silvio's reaction suggests the problem is not the suffering, but the mess. That detachment is more unsettling than Polly's obvious nastiness, because Polly announces himself. Polly is hot-headed, unpredictable, and neurotically performative. The audience is never tempted to mistake him for safe. Silvio, by contrast, looks safe until the moment he is not, and the lack of emotional noise around his violence makes it feel more systemic. This is why the character can be more disturbing than the crew's louder monsters. He makes harm feel orderly, and order is a soothing disguise. The show complicates the strong silent myth further by demonstrating that silence does not equal strength. It can also be an evasion. Silvio's limited openness makes him effective as a right hand because he absorbs stress without demanding emotional accommodation from others. There is a telling moment during Tony's hospitalization after being shot. Certain men sleep, drift, or collapse under uncertainty, while Silvio remains awake, watchful. It reads as devotion and competence. It also reads as a man who has trained himself to treat vulnerability as a private inconvenience. The irony, and the show's quiet cruelty, is that this training has limits. His brief stint as acting boss in Season 6 is almost a dark joke. The man who has advised Tony since their earliest days cannot tolerate the chair for more than a short stretch. On paper, the disputes are banal. Who collects from which stop, who kicks up what, whose complaint gets prioritized, which minor grievance needs an immediate ruling. The stress comes not from substance, but from volume and velocity, and from what it signals. As acting boss, he is temporary, and temporary authority invites challenge. Men who would have swallowed their complaints around Tony suddenly require answers now. The organization's neediness becomes a flood, and Silvio's body responds with panic, stress, and illness. The show makes the burden explicit through Tony's own account of leadership. Being number one means every decision affects every other decision, and in the end, the boss is alone with it. Silvio has spent years as the right hand, a role defined by influence without final exposure. He even articulates the principle elsewhere. Some men are better at being number two. He is one of them. As a number two, he is decisive, calm, and effective. As number one, he becomes anxious, physically ill, and visibly overwhelmed, which is both humbling and revealing. The pressure does not create weakness. It exposes the cost of his previous composure. That arc also clarifies a key difference between Silvio and Tony. Tony wants fear and respect. Silvio seems to want respect and perhaps even to be liked. That desire matters. Men comply with Tony because Tony projects inevitability and dominance. Men test Silvio because they sense his investment in being perceived as fair. The show stages the disrespect plainly. A subordinate can pester him repeatedly, even as an ambulance door closes, because the temporary boss lacks the aura of unchallengeable threat. Watching this happen is almost comedic, if the comedy were not attached to a man spiraling toward collapse. In this world, management experience does not mean the work is easy. It means the work is relentless, thankless, and performed under the constant possibility of punishment from above and revolt from below. The character's loyalty, so often cited as his most admirable quality, also deserves its own skepticism. Loyalty in this world is not moral commitment, it is operational alignment. Silvio's loyalty is valuable because it is consistent, and it is frightening because it can be ruthless. He is willing to do anything and anyone in the best interest of the family. When a potential mutiny threatens the hierarchy, he shuts it down. When a would-be rebel like Bert Gervasi becomes a problem, he removes him. When an informant threatens exposure, he performs the necessary execution with chilling calm. There is nothing sentimental about his loyalty. It is a clean devotion to the institution. At times, his loyalty even looks like caretaking. When he shields a subordinate's theft at a construction job, taking heat and smoothing Tony's perception, it can be read as a lesson, proof that another rising leader lacks respect. It can also be read as crowd control. Keep a potentially resentful soldier satisfied, a man carrying grief and resentment after a twin's murder and a series of humiliations. Either way, the purpose is the same: stabilize the machine. The individual is not protected for the individual's sake. The individual is managed so the system survives. That is the kind of friendship that flourishes here: practical, conditional, and always in service of the enterprise. The series does allow flashes of genuine affection, which is part of what keeps the audience entangled. Silvio shows real concern during Tony's coma. Later, when Silvio is shot, Tony's response carries something like reciprocal warmth. These moments are not sentimental exceptions. They are bait. They remind the audience that these men are capable of feeling, which makes what they do harder to dismiss as simple monstrosity. Affection exists here. It just exists inside a structure that treats people as expendable as soon as they become inconvenient. The show's genius is refusing to resolve that contradiction into comfort. It uses affection to thicken the moral fog, then brings the audience back to the facts. All of this makes Silvio's likability less a contradiction than a warning. He is likable because he is entertaining, competent, and calm. He is also likable because he is used sparingly, which preserves his mystique. He rarely drags the narrative into extended self-pity, the way Christopher can, or into obsessive bitterness, the way Paulie often does. He is not constantly in a feud. He is the behind-the-scenes man, the one who keeps things moving. That steadiness is appealing. It is also lethal. The viewer relaxes around him, and the show knows it. When his violence erupts, against Tracy, against Adriana, it lands with particular force because it violates the audience's own investment in his reasonable persona. The comparisons with other characters only sharpen the point. Bobby Bacalieri is often treated as the likable exception, a family man whose softness reads as decency among wolves. Silvio is likable without being soft. He cheats on his wife, abuses his employees, profits from a system bordering on trafficking, and kills with professional detachment. Yet he still presents as the reasonable adult. Paulie, meanwhile, may be more compelling as a character, precisely because he is more openly neurotic. His superstitions, his germ fears, his anxious relationship to his mother figure, his volatile pride. Those details create texture and unpredictability. Silvio is less explored internally, but that is why he works so effectively as a moral trap. His steadiness invites projection. He can be imagined as the authentic mafioso, the loyal friend, the competent advisor. Then the show reminds everyone that authenticity here means being good at terrible things. The series also makes sure his steadiness is conditional. When gambling pulls at him, the darker edge surfaces. The grounded man can become ugly and reckless. When cultural flashpoints are pushed, he can become agitated and petty. He is not above the crew, he is merely better at presenting himself as above it. The show uses that presentation as a mirror for the audience. If the audience can like Silvio, the audience can like anyone. provided the monster tells a good joke and stands still long enough. There is, finally, the meta-irony that the actor behind the character is widely known for another life entirely. Steve Van Zandt, a longtime member of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, brought rock and roll cool into a mafia drama without needing traditional acting fireworks. That background contributes to the character's aura. The performance is built on timing, presence, and iconography. It is also reportedly marked by reluctance in certain moments, particularly the scene where Adriana is eliminated, which only underlines the brutality of what the script requires. A likable figure performing an unlikable act with no narrative relief. The audience is left with the uncomfortable recognition that the character's calm is not kindness, it is proficiency. Speculation about his later coma, whether he ever wakes, whether he survives, ultimately matters less than the truth already delivered. Survival would not rewrite the scenes that define him. It would not soften the parking lot. It would not change the woods. Naturally, it is justified as necessary, which is always adorable. It would only extend the life of the organization's most polished functionary. Silvio Dante is unsettling because he embodies the show's central indictment without needing lectures. He is the friend who becomes the executioner, the counselor who is also an exploiter, the comic relief who can turn vicious with unnerving ease. The Sopranos does not ask for admiration of this world. It demonstrates how admiration happens, how it is earned, and how quickly it can be exposed as misplaced. Silvio is the demonstration made flesh, a lead pipe wrapped in velvet, handed to the audience with a smile, then used exactly as intended. If you want more insights hiding in plain sight, just like a wire in a cleaver hat, hit subscribe.